article titled Never Say Anything a Child Can Say by Stephen C. Reinhart, the author emphasized the importance of student-centered learning. Reinhart directs teachers to let students discuss ideas and solutions, and he drives home the point that for students to really learn math, they need to be able to explain it. The author gave this definition of a good teacher. He says, quote, one who gets students to explain things so well that they can be understood, end quote. I want to be one who teaches in that way. I want to promote student discussion and problem solving in my classroom. The author also writes about questioning strategies. He gives us 5 questioning strategies. The first one is never say anything a child can say. It is important to let kids know that their participation and voice is essential in the classroom discussions. The second strategy is ask good questions. As an educator, I need to remember that the best questions are open-ended ones. Number 3, use more process questions than product questions. He defines process questions as ones that require a higher level of thinking. Number 4, replace lectures with a set of questions. An effective teacher does more than lecture, which Reinhart states is merely transferring my notes to my students' notes without any information being transferred between our brains. That is a great definition of a lecture. Number 5, Reinhart says, be patient. I must remember that wait time is crucial in the classroom because good discussions take time. My overall takeaway from the article, Never Say Anything a Child Can Say, is this. First, I need to ask good questions of my students. I also need to have a good wait time for their responses. I need to remind my students that participation is not optional. In our classroom, I want to hear from everyone. And it is okay and even beneficial to let kids struggle in the classroom. It is a part of the learning process. I really enjoyed this article by Stephen C. Reinhart. Thank you. I read the article 13 Rules That Expire, written by Karen S. Sharp, Sarah B. Bush, and Barbara J. Dougherty. This article aligns to standard SMP 6, which states that mathematically proficient students try to communicate precisely to others, use clear definitions, and carefully formulated explanations. The author's purpose of this article is to discuss common rules, including vocabulary, that we as teachers share with our students that do not, quote, promote conceptual learning, end quote. I am a second grade teacher and found that these rules were very helpful, along with the provided expiration dates in the article as well. They were helpful because they will make me a more effective teacher that will promote student learning. The rules that I found most helpful and that I will use and apply immediately in my classroom are, number 2, use keywords to solve word problems. I did not know that was wrong. I have a poster in my classroom with all the keywords for word problems that I will not be using when I teach word problems next year, thanks to this article. Rule number 3, the number you say first is always less than the number that comes next. We second grade teachers say that often. We have counting circles at the beginning of every year for the first few months, and we talk about how the next number will be larger. Rule number 3 shows me that I need to take that out of my dialogue next year when I start teaching, especially, but I can even tell my current students that that is not the case. Another rule that was very helpful for me was rule number 13. The equal sign means to find the answer or write the answer. If you ask any second grader at my school what the equal sign means, they will say it means to find the answer. And I need to correct that dialogue in my own classroom so that students have a better conceptual understanding of what that means for problem solving. My takeaway from this article is to make it a priority to choose my words carefully as I teach so that I can set my students up for success in the future years of learning mathematics. Thank you. The next article I read was the Pumpkin article, a mathematical cornucopia of pumpkins, written by Glenn Gebhard. This article discussed what the author calls, quote, hands-on, end quote, and quote-unquote minds-on explorations in math. I learned details of a math representation as well as the process involved with it. NCTM states that mathematical investigations, quote, encourage teachers and students to explore multiple approaches and representations while engaging in math activities, end quote. That piqued my interest because I feel like in math, it's so easy to give a worksheet or to do some assignment like that. This is a hands-on, minds-on approach. So I was excited to read more of the article. Here are some details I learned about mathematical investigations. First, it is an open-ended event, and it can have several solutions that are acceptable. Secondly, it is centered on a theme or event, in this case, pumpkins. Also, these investigations often include collaboration and cooperation, and they involve collecting data and using multiple strategies as well. Now that we know about mathematical investigations, the author discusses this pumpkin investigation. He states that the investigation focuses on the measurements of pumpkins or other seasonal fruits, using the correct measurement tools, and understanding the relationship among the measured attributes. My takeaway lessons from this investigation and from the article are as follows. First, the task was authentic, and it provided students with opportunities to explore and ask their own questions. Students could make connections as they looked at the data. All of these things involve the student much more than a worksheet or a lecture about a topic would have done. And for that reason, I was a fan of this article because it reminded me that we need to get students involved in the learning process, not just listening and receiving the words that we've already figured out for them. Thank you. The next article I read was 10 Practical Tips for Making Fractions Come Alive and Make Sense. It was written by Doug M. Clark, Ann Roche, and Annie Mitchell. I have been reading through Sherry Parrish's book called Number Talks, Fractions, Decimals, and Percentages this semester. So I was intrigued to read this article since it was about fractions as well. And since I don't have a deep understanding of fractions, I thought this would prove to be very helpful for me personally and as a teacher as well. The authors of this article listed 10 tips to make fractions more understandable. Here are several of the tips that I can implement in my class currently. Number 7, give emphasis to fractions as division. Number 8, link fractions, decimals, and percentages wherever possible. Number 10, look for examples and activities that can engage students to think about fractions in particular and rational numbers in general. Some of my takeaways from this article are that I need to use correct and consistent vocabulary regarding fractions. I found this is a consistent theme through all of the articles I've read, using consistent language when I'm talking about math. Also, from this article, I learned that I need to provide multiple models to represent fractions. Our learners learn differently and in so many different ways. By using a variety of models, I can help meet the needs of many students so that they can attain better understanding of fractions. This was a great article about fractions. I think it really tied in with Sherry Parrish's book as well. So it was an added bonus that I was going through that study as well. This was a great article. The last article I read was called Unpacking Word Problems for Diverse Learners, a guide for using schema. It was written by Elizabeth A. Stevens and Sarah R. Powell. This article said that you must unpack a word problem. The authors give you 5 ways to go about unpacking a word problem. Number 1, read the problem. Number 2, identify important versus extraneous information. Number 3, identify the unknown information to be solved. Number 4, choose a strategy for the problem type. And number 5, solve the problem correctly. The authors shared schema instructions should be, quote, systematic and explicit, end quote. The way to accomplish that is through modeling, guided practice, and independent practice. In the classroom setting, we call that the I do, we do, you do strategy, and it is an effective strategy for instructing students. It is important to use language that helps students think critically throughout the solving process. Students must think in an analytical way, the author suggests, while they're solving word problems. Some of my takeaways from this article are that it was a reminder of the importance of differentiating instruction for diverse learners. Also, I need to teach students to interpret data, which will aid in the word problem solving process and in turn give them success with it. Lastly, I loved when the article stated that schema is the most effective method for providing instruction for word problems for children who have difficulties with math or may have disabilities as well. I talk about schema with my students across all curriculum and subjects throughout my days because I believe that using schema aids in the learning process. It helps with solving problems and it helps with students' comprehension. So I love that I can learn what I read from this article about using schema, and I can use it, yes, with my math, with unpacking word problems, but I can use what I learned from these authors and I can integrate it with all subjects that I teach. Thank you. I enjoyed reading the 5 articles for this article debrief. I feel that I learned many things that I can take away and use in my classroom right away, from differentiating instruction, encouraging children to use schema and interpret data, to doing math investigations instead of handing students a worksheet. I feel that I have learned different lessons about being hands-on and using authentic tasks as well. I will use these articles and take the knowledge I gained from them and implement them in my second grade classroom this year and for years to come. Thank you for listening.